Hi everyone, and welcome to Jane Talks Murder, where I'll be talking about and reviewing an episode of Poirot, Murder, She Wrote, Diagnosis Murder, or Jonathan Creek. Today I'm looking at Murder, She Wrote, Keep the Home Fries Burning, or as I like to call it, that time Amos almost ate himself to death. We begin the episode at, wow, that is a terrible sign choice. Anyway, this place is pretty deserted, except for this guy, who was Colonel Lynch in the A-Team, who rushes out to see Sheriff Tupper, who says he's on his way to a diner up the road, which Jess and Seth are also going to. This day-drinking chef is being hassled by his boss, as more people show up, including Mercer and Ebenezer, who really don't like one another. This place is bumping, where the waitress pushes strawberry preserves with every breakfast, as these women giggle over the menu, and Dupre just wanders around instead of actually cooking. Beau also comes for breakfast, mad that Cornelia left his place to work here, while Amos pilfers the preserves, but avoids the strawberry one, and these two ding-dongs are still arguing. The chef is still drinking as Beau sneaks in, pointing out something is burning, and people pay for their bills and start to leave. This lady having to sign something before doubling back to tip Cornelia. But suddenly this man calls for a doctor as his son is ill in the car park. This lady doesn't feel well either. McHenry collapses and, holy shit, is this lady dead? Seth tells Floyd to close the diner, so everyone evacuates. Yeah, the lady is dead! And everyone else is carted off to the hospital, where Margot from the health department introduces herself, and she's a bit of a bitch. She goes to the diner to investigate, but Amos and his iron stomach ate most things, except for the strawberry preserve, a jar of which is missing, but Margot isn't interested. Back at the hospital, Wilhelmina's husband shows up, so Seth tells him about Betty, which he's surprisingly distraught about. So Jess comforts him and theorizes about how everyone could have been poisoned, but Margot mocks her for it, and oh no, you just didn't! Back at the diner, Jess and Floyd look for the missing jar while they discuss who could have done this, and Floyd reckons it's Dupre, who is trying to get out of his contract by getting himself fired, before a phone call from Seth sends Jess back to the hospital. He says it's not food poisoning, it's belladonna poisoning, and has an antidote which Tupper volunteers to try out. But with the jar still missing, Jess heads back to Dixon's diner to talk to the rehired Cornelia, who says the missing preserve was at Beau's table and she forgot to remove it during the fuss, so doesn't know who took the jar. Tupper immediately blames Beau, except he was the last to get the preserves, so switches to Cornelia, leaving the other two stunned. And Jess suggests maybe it was Dupre, before Mercer pipes up and blames McHenry, who didn't have the strawberry preserve, even though he did. Jess asks Wilhelmina how much preserve she had, which wasn't much, but Betty apparently had loads. Harrison isn't paying attention, and while Jess is certain that was the cause, Margot thinks it's all bullshit, but does want to harass the old lady who makes it. Jess asks about the person who delivers the preserves, while Beau and McHenry argue at the jail until Amos tells them to shut up and leave, as Dupre is brought in, who Jess tricks into revealing he's not a real chef, despite his famous family. Dupre says Beau was in the kitchen, as well as some randomer who just wandered in.
A mysterious stranger, huh? I've heard better stories from a poacher with a trap in one hand and a rabbit in the other.
But Jess thinks maybe someone was specifically targeted rather than trying to bring the restaurant down. Harrison walks in complaining about a parking ticket, who Dupre identifies as the mystery man, so Jess goes hard on him, implying that he was already in town when the murder took place, so he huffs off. And that night, Jess consults her murder manual when Harrison shows up for a chat and admits he was having an affair with Betty, who wanted to tell Wilhelmina, so he followed them to the restaurant to try and stop the tea being spilled. Jess says to tell Amos and he leaves, so she tells Seth and wonders if they're missing something. Perhaps Betty wasn't the intended victim, and she goes to ask Beau who was at the diner after he ran out to help, but he can't remember. Margot shows up to pay for her bill and mentions a tip to Cornelia, which sparks a Jessica brainwave, so she rushes off to see Floyd and rifles through the receipts before rushing off again. Jess gets to the hospital. The back of this lady's hat looks like an alien, and Jess points out Wilhelmina is using Betty's bag now, not her own.
If she can't explain it, maybe I can.
After the preserves were eaten by the annoying couple who didn't get sick, they were given to Wilhelmina before Amos took them, and they were passed around, everyone else getting sick, meaning Wilhelmina had to have been the cause. She wasn't at the table when Amos took the preserves in order to stop him, so lied about a tip to double back, even though she already left one, and grabbed the jar, but the preserves spilled out in her bag, so she ditched it and used Betty's bag instead. Wilhelmina crumbles and admits to everything, so Harrison leaves, and Wilhelmina tries to hold in a sneeze. I really like this one. I mean, I worked out the killer, the means, and the motive pretty quickly. But that's okay, because the clues were all there. Amos not eating the preserve, Wilhelmina doubling back, and Harrison's reaction to Betty's death. As well as, let's face it, in a poisoning case, the killer is always going to end up a little bit poisoned just to cover their tracks. I've said it before, but I prefer these kinds of episodes to the ones where you can't work out the killer because the clues and evidence are off screen. So yes, it's surprising, but it's also dumb. This one takes place in Cabot Cove, which I love. Even though we didn't get any recurring characters like Eve Simpson or Floyd, the other one, but I love the feel of the town as opposed to the later seasons that take place in the city. Usually on this show, we have some misogynistic male cop who treats Jessica like crap, so it was an interesting twist to have her go up against Margot instead. And I found it funny that Amos accused pretty much every person except for the killer. Classic Amos. What was interesting about this episode too was the murder weapon was absent, and because the preserves were moved around so much, it was a Russian roulette of who was going to get killed. And all those people dropping in the car park was a cool moment in an enjoyable episode. We have one victim, Betty Fiddler, who was killed with poisoned strawberry preserve as payback for having an affair with the husband of our killer, Wilhelmina Fraser. So there you have it. That was Keep the Home Fries Burning. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, or come say hi on social media. If you enjoyed this video, then please hit that like button, it really does mean a lot, or consider subscribing if you want to keep investigating with me. Alternatively, feel free to check out my other YouTube channels. Thank you so much for watching, I'll speak to you soon, and keep an eye out for clues.